What if I told you the bloodiest decade in cinema history wasn't filled with horror movies, but with World War II films that dared to tell the truth? While America partied through the 70s, Hollywood's boldest directors were crafting brutal masterpieces that shattered every war movie convention. These weren't your father's heroic tales. They were unflinching examinations of humanity's darkest hour that changed cinema forever. Patton, 1970. George C. Scott refused his Oscar for playing General George Patton, calling the Academy Awards a meat parade. But his towering performance as America's most controversial military genius launched the decade with a bang that still echoes today. Director Franklin Schaffner knew he was walking into a minefield. How do you make a hero out of a man who slapped shell-shocked soldiers and compared himself to ancient conquerors? The answer was simple. You don't make him a hero at all. You make him human. Scott's Patton was a walking contradiction wrapped in polished brass. The opening speech alone, delivered against a giant American flag, became one of cinema's most quoted monologues. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser, Patton declares, and Scott delivered those words with the fervor of a tent revival preacher. The film swept the Academy Awards, winning 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. But the real victory was cultural. Vietnam was raging, and audiences were hungry for a war film that didn't glorify conflict. Patton gave them a complex portrait of military leadership that asked uncomfortable questions about the price of victory. Scott's refusal to accept his Oscar became Hollywood legend. He called the ceremony offensive, barbarous, and innately corrupt. The Academy mailed him the statue anyway. He used it as a doorstop. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Richard Attenborough assembled the most expensive cast in film history to tell the story of World War II's most ambitious failure. Operation Market Garden promised to end the war by Christmas 1944. Instead, it became a masterclass in military overreach. The film's budget was staggering for its time. Over $20 million, with much of it spent on A-list talent. Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Anthony Hopkins, Robert Redford, and Gene Hackman all shared screen time in what became the airport of war movies. But beneath the star power lay a devastating true story. The plan was audacious. Drop 35,000 paratroopers behind German lines to capture key bridges across Holland. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Attenborough's attention to detail was obsessive. He used actual veterans as consultants and filmed at many of the real locations. The result was a 3-hour epic that felt more like a documentary than entertainment. Critics called it too long and too ambitious, but audiences were mesmerized by its scope. The film's greatest achievement was showing how good intentions and careful planning could still lead to catastrophe. Operation Market Garden failed spectacularly, costing thousands of lives and extending the war by months. As one character observes, we might be going a bridge too far. Indeed they were. The Dirty Dozen, 1967/1970's impact. Though released in 1967, The Dirty Dozen cast a long shadow over 1970s war cinema, proving that audiences were ready for anti-heroes long before Dirty Harry walked his beat. Robert Aldrich took 12 convicted criminals, gave them a suicide mission, and somehow created one of the most influential war films ever made. The premise was outrageous. Recruit the worst soldiers in military prison to assassinate German officers at a French chateau. Lee Marvin led this motley crew with the charisma of a born leader and the morals of a hired gun. His Major Reisman wasn't interested in patriotism or glory. He just wanted to complete the mission and get his men home alive. The film's violence was shocking for its time. The climactic assault on the chateau was brutal and uncompromising. Critics called it fascist and morally reprehensible. Audiences couldn't get enough. The Dirty Dozen proved that war films didn't need clean-cut heroes or noble causes. Sometimes the best soldiers were the ones society had already written off. This cynical worldview would dominate 1970s cinema, from MASH to Apocalypse Now. The film spawned countless imitators and 3 made-for-TV sequels, but none captured the original's anarchic spirit or its fundamental question. In war, who are the real criminals? Kelly's Heroes, 1970. Clint Eastwood robbed a bank behind enemy lines, and somehow it became the most subversive war film of the decade. Kelly's Heroes started as a straight action movie, but morphed into a counterculture masterpiece that questioned everything about military authority. The plot was pure Hollywood nonsense. A group of American soldiers discover Nazi gold and launch their own private war to steal it. But director Brian Hutton and writer Troy Kennedy Martin used this absurd premise to skewer military hierarchy and capitalist greed. Eastwood's Kelly was the antithesis of the traditional war hero. He wasn't fighting for freedom or democracy. He was fighting for 32 bars of gold worth $16 million. Always with the negative waves, complains Donald Sutherland's hippie tank commander Oddball, perfectly capturing the film's irreverent tone. The supporting cast was a who's who of character actors. Telly Savalas chewed scenery as the opportunistic Sergeant Big Joe, while Don Rickles provided comic relief as the perpetually nervous supply sergeant. But it was Sutherland who stole the show, with his anachronistic portrayal of a World War II hippie. Critics were baffled. Was it a comedy or an action film? A war movie or an anti-war statement? The answer was all of the above. Kelly's Heroes proved that genre boundaries were meant to be broken, especially when there was gold to be stolen. Slaughterhouse V, 1972. George Roy Hill adapted Kurt Vonnegut's masterpiece and created the most surreal war film ever made. Billy Pilgrim became unstuck in time, experiencing the bombing of Dresden through the fractured lens of post-traumatic stress. Vonnegut had lived through the Dresden bombing as a prisoner of war. His novel was deeply personal, and Hill understood that conventional filmmaking wouldn't capture its essence. Instead, he created a dreamlike narrative that jumped between past, present, and future. Michael Sachs played Billy as a man broken by experience but somehow still functioning. His performance was understated and haunting, showing how trauma reshapes perception and memory. The famous refrain, "So it goes," became a mantra for accepting life's absurdities. The film's depiction of Dresden was devastating. Hill used actual footage of the city's destruction, creating a hellscape that rivaled anything in fiction. The bombing sequence was brief but unforgettable, showing how quickly civilization could crumble. Critics were divided. Some called it brilliant, others found it pretentious. But Slaughterhouse V established that war films could be experimental and still powerful. It opened doors for later unconventional approaches to military subjects. The film's time-shifting narrative influenced countless later movies. From Apocalypse Now to The Deer Hunter, filmmakers began exploring how war trauma affects memory and perception. Billy Pilgrim's fractured consciousness became a template for depicting psychological wounds. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's hallucinogenic descent into religious hysteria wasn't technically a World War II film, but its exploration of fanaticism and power corruption influenced how 1970s filmmakers approached historical conflict. Based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudoun, Russell created a fever dream of sexual repression and political manipulation. Oliver Reed played Father Grandier, a priest caught between genuine faith and carnal desire, while Vanessa Redgrave portrayed Sister Jean, a hunchbacked nun whose religious ecstasy bordered on madness. The film's imagery was shocking even by 1970s standards. Russell filled the screen with naked bodies, religious iconography, and scenes of torture that made audiences squirm. Warner Brothers cut 17 minutes from the American release, but even the edited version was too much for many viewers. Critics were polarized. Some hailed it as a masterpiece of religious cinema. Others called it pornographic blasphemy. The Catholic Church condemned it outright, which only increased its notoriety. The Devils proved that historical films could be visceral and contemporary. Russell's techniques, extreme close-ups, jarring edits, surreal imagery, influenced war filmmakers who wanted to capture conflict's psychological impact rather than just its physical reality. Cross of Iron, 1977. Sam Peckinpah brought his signature violence to the Eastern Front and created the most brutal World War II film ever made. Cross of Iron showed war from the German perspective, a controversial choice that paid off in devastating fashion. James Coburn played Sergeant Steiner, a Wehrmacht veteran who cared more about his men than military honors. Maximilian Schell was his aristocratic nemesis, Captain Stransky. desperate for a medal to impress his Prussian family. Their conflict played out against the backdrop of Germany's retreat from Stalingrad. Peckinpah's direction was characteristically violent. Battle scenes erupted in slow-motion carnage, with bodies flying and blood spraying in balletic patterns. The famous violence as poetry approach reached its peak in the film's climactic assault. The film's budget was modest, but Peckinpah made every dollar count. He filmed in Yugoslavia with actual military equipment, creating authentic-looking battle sequences that rivaled big-budget productions. The result was intimate yet epic, personal yet universal. Critics praised Coburn's performance and Peckinpah's direction, but questioned the film's moral stance. Could a movie about German soldiers avoid glorifying Nazism? Peckinpah's answer was to focus on human survival rather than political ideology. Cross of Iron was Peckinpah's last great film and his only war movie. It proved that even controversial subjects could be treated with intelligence and artistry. The film's influence extended far beyond the war genre, inspiring action directors for decades. MacArthur, 1977. Gregory Peck stepped into Douglas MacArthur's boots and created a portrait of American ambition that was both admiring and deeply unsettling. The film chronicled MacArthur's Pacific Campaign and his eventual dismissal by President Truman. Director Joseph Sargent faced the same challenge as Patton's makers: how to depict a controversial military figure without either demonizing or sanctifying him. Peck's performance walked that tightrope with characteristic dignity. The film covered MacArthur's greatest triumphs and his most spectacular failures. His brilliant island-hopping campaign across the Pacific was balanced against his disastrous miscalculations in Korea. The famous "Old Soldiers Never Die" speech became Peck's crowning moment. Production was troubled from the start. The original director was fired, and Peck clashed with studio executives over the script. But these behind-the-scenes conflicts added authenticity to the film's themes of ego and ambition. Critics were respectful but unenthusiastic. The film felt like homework compared to Patton's fiery energy. But Peck's performance was universally praised, and the film found its audience on television and home video. MacArthur raised questions about military leadership and civilian control that remain relevant today. In an era of ongoing conflicts, the film's examination of military hubris felt prophetic. They Were Expendable, 1945/1970s revival. John Ford's elegy for America's Pacific Fleet experienced a critical revival in the 1970s, when film scholars rediscovered its emotional power and technical brilliance. Originally released in 1945, They Were Expendable told the story of PT boat crews in the Philippines during the early days of World War II. Robert Montgomery and John Wayne played naval officers watching their forces retreat in the face of Japanese advances. Ford's direction was characteristically understated. He focused on small moments of camaraderie and loss rather than grand heroics. The film's title said everything. These men knew they were sacrificial pawns in a larger strategic game. The 1970s rediscovery came thanks to critics like Andrew Sarris and Peter Bogdanovich, who recognized Ford's achievement. They praised the film's melancholy tone and its honest depiction of military defeat. Here was a war film that didn't promise easy victories. Revival screenings drew new audiences who were hungry for complex war narratives. Vietnam had taught Americans that military conflicts didn't always end in triumph. They Were Expendable suddenly felt contemporary. The film's influence on 1970s war cinema was subtle but profound. Directors like Terrence Malick and Michael Cimino studied Ford's techniques for depicting warfare's psychological toll. The film's title became shorthand for military sacrifice. The Deer Hunter, 1978. Michael Cimino's 3-hour epic didn't technically focus on World War II, but its unflinching examination of war's impact on small-town America changed how filmmakers approach military subjects forever. The film followed 3 Pennsylvania steelworkers from their hometown wedding celebration through the hell of Vietnam and back to a community forever changed. Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and John Savage created unforgettable characters whose friendship became war's first casualty. Cimino's vision was ambitious beyond reason. He demanded complete control over every aspect of production, from casting to final cut. The result was a film that felt more like lived experience than entertainment. The Russian roulette sequences became cinema's most debated scenes. Critics argued about their historical accuracy, but audiences understood their metaphorical power. War was a game where the stakes were life and death, and the house always won. Christopher Walken's Oscar-winning performance as Nick, the soldier who couldn't escape war's psychological grip, became an icon of 1970s cinema. His final scene, repeating one shot before pulling the trigger, haunted viewers long after the credits rolled. The film's 3-hour length was initially considered commercial suicide, but The Deer Hunter proved that audiences would sit through epics if the story justified the running time. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Francis Ford Coppola's journey into the heart of darkness began as a World War II adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but evolved into the definitive Vietnam War film. The production became almost as legendary as the finished movie. Coppola's original vision involved moving Conrad's story from the Belgian Congo to World War II Philippines. But as the 1970s progressed and Vietnam dominated headlines, he shifted the setting to Southeast Asia. The core story remained the same: a journey into moral darkness. Martin Sheen played Captain Willard, assigned to eliminate the rogue Colonel Kurtz, portrayed by Marlon Brando in his most mysterious performance. The journey upriver became a descent through America's moral confusion about warfare and imperialism. Production was nightmarish. Typhoons destroyed sets, Sheen suffered a heart attack, and Brando arrived on location overweight and unprepared. Coppola famously declared, "My film is not about Vietnam. My film is Vietnam." The film's imagery was unforgettable. Robert Duvall's Colonel Kilgore surfing during an assault, while Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries blared from helicopter speakers, became one of cinema's most quoted scenes. "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," entered popular culture immediately. Critics were divided but impressed. The film's length and experimental structure challenged conventional war movie expectations, but its influence was immediate and lasting, changing how filmmakers depicted military conflict's psychological impact. Midway, 1976. Jack Smite brought the disaster movie template to World War II's most crucial naval battle and created a star-studded spectacle that prioritized action over analysis. The film assembled an incredible cast: Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda, James Coburn, Glenn Ford, and Hal Holbrook all shared screen time in a story that jumped between American and Japanese perspectives. It was Airport meets Tora, Tora, Tora. The battle sequences were spectacular for their time. Smite used extensive miniature work and stock footage to recreate the aerial combat that changed the Pacific War's momentum. The film's technical achievements were remarkable given its relatively modest budget, but critics weren't impressed. They found the film's characters thin and its storytelling conventional. The disaster movie formula didn't translate well to historical subjects, they argued. Audiences disagreed, making Midway a substantial hit. The film's real achievement was educational. Many viewers learned about the Battle of Midway for the first time through this accessible Hollywood treatment. Historical accuracy took second place to entertainment value, but the basic facts were preserved. Midway represented the last gasp of old-fashioned war spectacles. Soon, filmmakers would focus on war's psychological impact rather than its tactical details. But for audiences hungry for straightforward heroics, the film delivered in spades. The Boys from Brazil, 1978. Franklin Schaffner's thriller about Nazi war criminals hiding in South America took the horror of the Holocaust and wrapped it in accessible entertainment. The result was both chilling and commercially successful. Gregory Peck played Dr. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death himself, plotting to resurrect the Third Reich through genetic manipulation. Laurence Olivier was the Nazi hunter determined to stop him. Their cat-and-mouse game played out across 2 continents. The film's premise was outrageous. Mengele has created dozens of Hitler clones and is manipulating their environments to recreate the Führer's childhood. But Schaffner directed with deadly seriousness, never winking at the audience or acknowledging the story's pulp origins. Peck's performance was surprisingly effective. Known for playing American heroes, he brought unexpected menace to the role of history's most notorious war criminal. His Mengele was cultured, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless. The film raised uncomfortable questions about genetics and human nature. If environment shapes personality, could evil be artificially recreated? The Boys from Brazil suggested that the answer might be yes, and that prospect terrified audiences. Critics praised the performances but questioned the film's exploitation of Holocaust imagery. Was it appropriate to turn Nazi atrocities into thriller entertainment? The debate continues today, but the film's impact was undeniable. The Man in the Glass Booth, 1975. Arthur Hiller's courtroom drama posed an impossible question. Can a Holocaust survivor and a Nazi war criminal be the same person? The answer challenged everything audiences thought they knew about identity and guilt. Maximilian Schell played Arthur Goldman, a wealthy New York businessman who claims to be a Holocaust survivor. But when Israeli agents kidnap him to face war crimes charges, the truth becomes murky. Is Goldman really the Nazi Colonel Dorf, or is he an elaborate imposter? The film was based on Robert Shaw's controversial play, which Shaw adapted from his own novel. The theatrical origins showed in the dialogue-heavy courtroom sequences, but Hiller's direction kept the pace taut and engaging. Schell's performance was tour de force acting. He had to convince audiences that his character could be both victim and perpetrator, often within the same scene. The transformation was remarkable and deeply unsettling. The film's themes resonated with 1970s audiences grappling with questions of collective guilt and individual responsibility. Vietnam had taught Americans that clear moral lines didn't always exist in warfare. The Man in the Glass Booth explored that ambiguity through Holocaust testimony. Critics were respectful but cautious. The film's subject matter was too sensitive for casual entertainment, but too important to ignore. It found its audience through word of mouth and critical support. Marathon Man, 1976. John Schlesinger turned a routine thriller into a meditation on Holocaust trauma that still makes audiences squirm 45 years later. Is it safe? Became the most terrifying question in cinema history. Dustin Hoffman played Babe Levy, a graduate student who becomes entangled with Nazi war criminals hiding in New York. Laurence Olivier was Dr. Zell, a former concentration camp dentist who uses his professional skills for interrogation purposes. The infamous dental torture scene became one of cinema's most discussed sequences. Schlesinger filmed it with clinical precision, never showing explicit gore, but creating maximum psychological impact. The sound of the drill was enough to make audiences cover their ears. Hoffman's method-acting approach became legendary. He stayed awake for days to look exhausted, prompting Olivier's famous comment, "Try acting, dear boy. It's much easier." But the technique worked, creating a performance that felt genuinely desperate. The film's themes connected Holocaust trauma to contemporary paranoia. Zell represented the past that wouldn't stay buried, while Babe embodied innocence confronting evil. Their collision was inevitable and devastating. Marathon Man proved that Holocaust subjects could generate mainstream entertainment without trivializing historical tragedy. The film's success opened doors for more serious treatments of Nazi war crimes in popular cinema. Julia, 1977. Fred Zinnemann's elegant drama showed how personal relationships survived political upheaval, earning Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave Oscar nominations for their portrayal of lifelong friends separated by war. The film told the story of playwright Lillian Hellman and her mysterious friend Julia, who joined the anti-Nazi resistance in the 1930s Europe. Their friendship, tested by political commitment and personal sacrifice, became a meditation on loyalty and courage. Redgrave's Julia appeared in only a few scenes, but her presence dominated the film. She embodied the aristocratic idealist who chose dangerous political action over comfortable safety. Her performance was luminous and tragic. Fonda played Hellman as a woman torn between personal comfort and political conscience. When Julia asks her to smuggle money to endangered resistance fighters, Hellman must choose between safety and friendship. The choice defines her character. Zinnemann's direction was characteristically precise. He avoided melodrama in favor of psychological realism, showing how ordinary people made extraordinary moral choices. The film's restraint made its emotional moments more powerful, Critics praised the performances and Zinnemann's direction, but some questioned the story's historical accuracy. Later revelations about Hellman's memoirs cast doubt on the film's factual basis, but its emotional truth remained intact. A Night to Remember, 1958/1970s revival. Roy Ward Baker's meticulous recreation of the Titanic disaster experienced a critical revival in the 1970s, when audiences rediscovered its documentary-style approach to historical tragedy. The film's original 1958 release established the template for disaster movies, but 1970s viewers appreciated its restraint and authenticity. Unlike later Hollywood spectacles, A Night to Remember focused on human behavior under extreme pressure. Kenneth More played Second Officer Lightoller with characteristic British understatement. His performance embodied the era's class-based heroism, showing how social expectations shaped individual responses to crisis. The film's attention to historical detail was unprecedented. Baker consulted survivors and maritime experts, creating accurate portrayals of the ship's final hours. The result felt more like documentary than entertainment. Revival screenings in the 1970s drew new audiences comparing the film to contemporary disaster movies like The Poseidon Adventure and Earthquake. Critics noted how Baker's restraint made the tragedy more rather than less powerful. The film's influence on later Titanic adaptations was profound. James Cameron studied Baker's techniques extensively while developing his 1997 blockbuster. The DNA of A Night to Remember runs through every subsequent telling of the story. Black Sunday, 1977. John Frankenheimer brought his paranoid thriller sensibilities to a story about Middle Eastern terrorists targeting America's most popular sporting event. The result was pure 1970s anxiety entertainment. The plot was ripped from contemporary headlines. Palestinian terrorists, aided by a disturbed Vietnam veteran, planned to attack the Super Bowl with an explosive-laden blimp. Robert Shaw played the Israeli intelligence agent trying to stop them. Bruce Dern's performance as the unhinged pilot was typically intense. His character, destroyed by Vietnam combat and personal failures, represented America's post-war psychological wounds. Terrorism became his vehicle for revenge against society. Frankenheimer's direction was characteristically paranoid. He used handheld cameras and natural lighting to create documentary-style realism. The Super Bowl sequences, filmed at the actual game, were genuinely tense. The film reflected 1970s fears about international terrorism and domestic violence. Munich Olympics massacre memories were fresh, and Vietnam veterans struggled with homecoming difficulties. Black Sunday combined both anxieties into effective entertainment. Critics praised the technical achievements, but questioned the film's exploitation of contemporary fears. Was it appropriate to turn terrorism into thriller entertainment? Audiences didn't care, making the film a substantial hit. The Eagle Has Landed, 1976. John Sturges adapted Jack Higgins' novel about a German plot to kidnap Winston Churchill and created an unlikely sympathetic portrait of Wehrmacht professionalism versus Nazi fanaticism. Michael Caine played Colonel Steiner, a paratrooper assigned to capture Churchill during a countryside visit. The mission was hopeless from the start, but Steiner's professionalism compelled him to attempt the impossible. The film's controversial element was its sympathetic portrayal of German soldiers. Steiner and his men were presented as honorable warriors following orders, distinct from Nazi true believers. This moral distinction was revolutionary for 1970s war films. Donald Sutherland appeared as Liam Devlin, an IRA operative helping the Germans. His performance was characteristically charismatic, making audiences root for characters they should theoretically oppose. Sturges directed with his usual attention to action sequences and character development. The parachute infiltration and village combat scenes were expertly crafted, building tension toward the inevitable tragic conclusion. Critics were divided about the film's moral stance. Could German soldiers be portrayed sympathetically without trivializing Nazi crimes? The Eagle Has Landed suggested they could, opening debates that continue today. Ike, The War Years, 1979. Melville Shavelson's television miniseries brought Dwight Eisenhower's wartime leadership to small-screen audiences hungry for complex historical portraits. Robert Duvall played Eisenhower as a political general forced to balance competing national interests while planning the largest military operation in history. His performance showed the immense pressure of coalition leadership. The series covered Eisenhower's rise from staff officer to supreme Allied commander, focusing on his relationships with Churchill, Montgomery, and other Allied leaders. Political maneuvering received as much attention as military strategy. Lee Remick played Kay Summersby, Eisenhower's British driver and rumored romantic interest. Their relationship was handled with characteristic 1970s frankness, acknowledging human needs while respecting historical discretion. The production values were impressive for television. Shavelson used authentic locations and period details to create convincing historical atmosphere. The D-Day planning sequences were particularly effective. Critics praised Duvall's performance and the series' attention to political complexity. Unlike theatrical films, television could explore character development over multiple hours. Ike took full advantage of the medium's possibilities. The Tin Drum, 1979. Volker Schlöndorff's adaptation of Günter Grass's controversial novel won the Palme d'Or and the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, proving that art house cinema could tackle World War II subjects with unprecedented boldness. The film followed Oscar Matzerath, a boy who refuses to grow up during the rise of Nazi Germany. His perspective on adult corruption and political madness provided a unique lens for examining fascism's appeal. David Bennett played Oscar with disturbing intensity. His adult intelligence trapped in a child's body created cognitive dissonance that made audiences uncomfortable. This was the film's intended effect. The film's imagery was often shocking. Schlöndorff didn't shy away from the novel's more controversial elements, including scenes of sexuality and violence that challenged rating board standards. The result was uncompromising, but powerful. Critics recognized the film's artistic achievement while questioning its accessibility. The Tin Drum demanded active engagement from viewers, refusing to provide easy entertainment or simple moral lessons. The film's influence on later war cinema was subtle but significant. It proved that experimental techniques could illuminate historical subjects in new ways. Traditional narrative approaches weren't the only option for serious filmmakers. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1979. Delbert Mann's television adaptation of Erich Maria Remarque's classic novel brought World War I's futility to a new generation, proving that great stories transcend their original medium. Richard Thomas played Paul Bäumer, the young German soldier whose enthusiasm for war gradually transforms into disillusionment and despair. His performance captured the novel's central tragedy: youth sacrificed for abstract political goals. The production faced the challenge of following Lewis Milestone's acclaimed 1930 version. Mann chose to emphasize psychological realism over spectacular battle sequences, focusing on character development and emotional truth. The film's anti-war message resonated with audiences still processing Vietnam's aftermath. Remarque's critique of military romanticism felt contemporary despite its World War I setting. War was war, regardless of the specific conflict. Ernest Borgnine and Donald Pleasance provided strong supporting performances as career soldiers who understood war's reality but couldn't escape its demands. Their characters represented institutional military wisdom. The film won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Drama Special, proving that television could handle serious literary adaptations with appropriate gravity and artistic integrity. The medium's limitations became advantages through intelligent adaptation choices. If you enjoyed this deep dive into 1970s war cinema, smash that like button, share with fellow film fanatics, and subscribe for more cinematic archaeology. What's your favorite World War II film from this incredible decade? Let us know in the comments below.